Part 25. I Can See the Laws of Things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 241. It was like a breeze, gently brushing her cheeks and lifting the broken hair on her forehead. The delicious taste flows from the tip of the tongue to the base of the tongue, fully wrapping the entire taste buds in it. The moment you eat it, the delicious taste spreads along the tongue, throughout the entire mouth, and then throughout the body. It's like bathing in a warm hot spring, and your whole body is translucent. Half dreaming, he looked at the cakes on the plate intoxicated and murmured, how could it be so delicious? I'm already a little reluctant to part with it. Lin An looked at the intoxicated expression on her face, smiled slightly, picked up a thin slice of orange, and said, "Would you like a piece?" Half Dream opened her small lips expectantly, and gently sucked the thin and transparent orange slice into her mouth. For a moment, Ban Meng's face showed a happy expression. The orange that melts in your mouth has a thin coolness, like a cool breeze, neutralizing the slight heat brought by the pastry. At this moment, Ban Meng only felt as if his taste buds were dancing. The deep feeling of happiness cannot be described in words. She didn't even know that eating could be so enjoyable and intoxicating. I want more. Her lips parted in a hazy dream, and her eyes were like sparkling water, which made Lin An's heart tremble. Lin fed her another piece of pastry. There was an intoxicated expression on her face again. It was a pleasure for Lin to see a girl like Ban Meng showing such an expression. More. After Ban Meng finished eating, he looked at Lin An imploringly. Lin An had no choice but to let her eat one piece after another. Soon, all the pastries on the plate were eaten by Ban Meng. Lin An spread his hands and said helplessly, "No more." Ban Meng's face turned crimson, and she stood there awkwardly, holding on to the hem of her skirt. The feeling just now was so happy, so I accidentally couldn't hold it back and ate it all. She raised her head, looked into Lin's eyes, and said in a low voice, I shouldn't have eaten them all." Lin An smiled and said, "It's okay. I'll make it after eating. As long as you think it tastes good." She stared blankly into Lin's eyes. Such soft words are really more irresistible than cakes. I don't know what to say anymore. Really, I love this man so much that I can't help but want to get closer to him and do some intimate things that should be done in the first place. Ban Meng bit her lip and whispered, "Nai, Lin, lower your head and get closer." Lin An was confused, bent down in front of her, and said, "What's wrong?" And just as he finished speaking, two slender and soft hands held his cheeks, stood on tiptoes half asleep, and gently covered his lips. For a moment, that feeling, combined with the aroma of the pastry, took over Lin's senses. Her movements were very unfamiliar, but she was working hard, and Lin could even see the blush on her face reaching to the root of her neck. After a long time, Ban Meng gently distanced himself and said in a low voice, "I want you to taste it too, that's all." Lin An looked at her delicate cheeks, small nose, and pure purple eyes without any impurities under her long eyelashes at close range, as well as her exuding aura with a little pastry crumb stained on them. Orange-scented lips. The beauty of this moment actually stunned Lin. Ban Meng said in a low voice, "I'm not very good at it because I've never done it before." Lin An came back to her senses, a smile appeared on her face, and with her half-asleep panic in her eyes, she picked her up, then blocked her lips and said, "It's okay, I can teach you." Ban Meng stared at Lin An blankly, feeling the reassuring aura on his body, subconsciously stretched out his hand, hugged his neck, and slowly closed his eyes. Really? Unprecedented satisfaction and happiness. Lin. Time flies, and 3 days fly by. Lin An stayed in Jianghai City for 3 days and spent time with his sister and Ban Meng. In these 3 days, Lin An also built Jianghai City's defense to a level comparable to that of the divine capital. In fact, after Lin An became the supreme ruler of the Kyushu territory, Jianghai City had faint signs of becoming a heaven-level main city. In the past 3 days, the eyes of the whole world were watching Lin An's every move. His words that frightened the whole world 3 days ago are still fresh in my mind. No one knows whether he is talking arrogantly or whether he will actually do what he says. At the same time, these 3 days were also the most painful 3 days for the 8 tribe alliance in the East. Whether overtly or covertly, 8 from a large number of foreign countries chose to sever ties with them out of fear of Lin's revenge. And because of Lin An's return and Chen Daoming's recovery, they were all shaken internally. In the past 3 days, many people have fled the areas under their jurisdiction. Even the army and top combat forces have experienced large-scale losses. In the city hall, Bai Lisan sat in the conference room with disheveled hair, his eyes filled with scarlet bloodshot eyes. He hadn't slept for 3 days. Today is the last day, he said hoarsely, but I don't believe that Lin An will really come. The other 7 old men all had sinister faces and gloomy faces. They knew that Bai Lisan was just deceiving himself. That Lin An will definitely come. He will never let these rebels go. Are we really doomed? An old man stood up suddenly, his eyes were about to burst, and he punched the conference table, gritting his teeth and said, "Those damn foreign forces, when they helped us, they said more than anything else, but now they are running faster than anyone else. We shouldn't trust these damn guys." Bai Lisan said solemnly, "What's the use of saying this now? Since they have abandoned us, we can only rely on ourselves now. Let's think about the retreat route in the future." But at this time, with a creak, the door of the conference room slowly opened. Accompanied by heavy footsteps, a deep voice came from outside the door. "Relying on your own will only lead to your own destruction. You have no way out. Bai Lisan, the only thing you can do is to stand on our side and fight against the Jiuzhu region." The faces of Bai Lisan and others changed, and they instantly showed excitement. They looked towards the direction of the gate, and a figure in a black robe slowly walked in. His face was expressionless. They could vaguely see the golden hair under his cloak and the cross on his forehead. "Lord Haijal," Bai Lisan stood up tremblingly and walked towards him tremblingly. "I thought you had already." Haijal said expressionlessly, "Do you think I am like those cowards, scared to death by Lin An's words?" He sneered and said, "Others may be afraid of Lin An, but I, Haijal, will not, and neither will the British Empire." Bai Lisan and others immediately walked in front of him excitedly, knelt on one knee, and said, "Thank you for staying, Lord Haijal, eternal glory belongs to Britain." Under the intimidation of Lin An, they no longer have the sense of honor as a Kyushu domain. Haijal sneered, turned around, strode out, and said, "I don't need your compliments. After I kill Lin An, I will ask you for something more substantial. I want your land in Kyushu domain. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 242. Jianghai City. Lin An sat on the sofa, crossed his legs, tapped his temples with his fingers, and looked deeply at the big screen. Behind him stood dozens of senior officials from Jianghai City's military and political circles, as well as several top combatants who had reached the level of generals and gods of law. Most of these top-level combat forces were mobilized from the divine capital to strengthen Jianghai City's forces. On the big screen is Chen Daoming, who is currently sitting in the capital of the gods. He has white hair and a very serious expression. Lin An asked deeply, "How is the situation internationally?" Chen Daoming frowned and said, "Although most countries have withdrawn their support and assistance to the 8 Nationalities Alliance, there are still a few countries that are indifferent to our statement and they have remained silent so far." Lin An said deeply, "Oh? Which ones are they?" Chen Daoming raised his head and said seriously, "The British Empire and the allies of the guards in the western continent, as well as the Kingdom of the Rising Sun in the east, our intelligence personnel received news that the Kingdom of the Rising Sun and the allies of the Guards had planned to stop. But under the hostage of the British Empire, most of their strong men still remain in the Eight Races Alliance. Lin narrowed his eyes. The situation has become clear. Lin gave them 3 days to call it a day, and since they were indifferent to it, that was good. Lin An stood up slowly, moved his wrists, and said slowly. So that means, are the 3 countries planning to declare war on our Kyushu region? A Dharma god behind Lin An put the robe representing the supreme ruler of the 9 provinces on Lin An's body. The high-ranking military and political officials behind him all stood upright, ready to be dispatched at any time. Chen Daoming said seriously, they haven't issued a statement yet, but judging from the results, they seem to have clearly wanted to interfere in our internal affairs. Do we need to take the final step against them? Before he could say the word negotiation, Lin interrupted him. Lin An raised his head and said, 3 days ago that was my ultimatum to them. Since they are not sure about it, I don't need to be polite anymore. He suddenly turned his head and said calmly, let's start the war. Just after Lin An said these words, the national machinery of the entire Jiuzhou territory started to move quickly. In just 1 hour, all the important cities in the entire Jiuzhou region received this highest order. Let the war begin. Directly go to war with the alliance of 8 tribes in the east, go to war with the British Empire, the Sunrise Empire, and the Guards Alliance. All the leaders of Chongcheng looked horrified and extremely shocked. They thought again of Lin's speech on television 3 days ago. In the past 3 days, they had not found any news about Lin An from the internet, and their hanging hearts gradually relaxed. But who would have thought that just 3 days later, Lin An's first order would be to start a war? And almost at the same moment, Jiuzhou Domain once again opened a nationwide channel. The last time it was opened was just 3 days ago. On the big screens in the central squares of major cities in Kyushu, on all TV channels, and on any live broadcast channel on the internet. Everyone looked at the screen in astonishment, their hearts agitated. 3 days have passed. With the opening of the official channel at this special time, they had a vague premonition of something. One after another people walked onto the square, they gathered together, raised their heads and looked at the big screen. In almost all the important cities in the Kyushu region, people gathered spontaneously in the central square. No matter who it was, there was already a vague guess in their mind. But no one said a word, it was like the calm before the storm. On the central square, the high-level officials of Chongqing City who were usually invisible to ordinary people came to the square under the escort of the army. People can only see their serious expressions and talking to each other constantly, but no one knows what they are talking about. Everyone can feel this urgency, this calm before the storm. On the high platform, the supreme rulers of Chongqing sat down. They looked at the highest order they had just received in their hands, raised their heads and looked seriously at the dense crowd below the stage. The same thing is happening in every important city. The Lord of Jiangdu City raised his head deeply and said, "We have received the order from Mr. Lin An, the supreme ruler of our Kyushu region. Later, Mr. Lin An will give a speech to the whole country." All the people raised their heads and looked at the big screen. They didn't know what to expect either. However, the turmoil of the past few months and the statement Lin An made to the world when he took office as supreme ruler 3 days ago are still engraved in their hearts. Time passed by minute. Finally, under the gaze of at least hundreds of millions of people, Lin's face appeared on the big screen. The moment Lin An appeared, everyone in the entire Jiuzhou region raised their fists and roared. Lin! 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 In this world where the strong are respected, the prestige achieved by Lin An with his fists has now risen to a level that no one else can even reach. Because in everyone's heart, Lin is invincible. Not only now, but also in the foreseeable future, Lin An will become the most powerful being in the Kyushu territory, leading them to a new era. Strong. In this world, only the strong can lead the weak, and only the strong can lead them to open up the future. The next moment, Lin An stared deeply at the camera, and his voice rolled to every corner of Zhizhu. 3 days ago, I said that this was my final ultimatum to those countries that dared to interfere in the internal affairs of my Zhizhu. Now, the 3-day period has passed, but unfortunately, there are still some countries in this world that dare to ignore my warning. They made a wrong decision. Lin An stared deeply at the camera, and outside the screen were the eyes of more than 1 billion people in the entire Zhizhu. No one spoke, everyone stared at the big screen and listened to Lin An's speech. But more and more people have clenched their fists. Lin An said deeply, I will not allow Zhizhu to split, and I will not allow anyone in this world who dares to challenge the authority of Zhizhu to appear. Then, Lin An said slowly, are you afraid of war? No. Outside the screen, people roared to the sky, and the rolling sound waves gathered together. The entire Zhizhu region was connected by these two words, like the roar of a lion, and the whole world trembled. At the same time, all the supreme rulers of other countries in the world also heard Lin An's speech through this channel facing the entire Zhizhu region. When Lin An said that, one country after another trembled. Their rulers looked at the screen tremblingly. They knew very clearly what this sentence meant. They knew very well what Lin An was going to do next. The rolling sound waves slowly subsided. Lin An looked deeply at the camera and said, I also believe that in this era of collapse, no one will be afraid of war. Then very good, I am also very willing to give an explanation for what I said 3 days ago. In an instant, the camera on the screen suddenly pulled away. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 243. Under the astonished gazes of more than 1 billion people in the entire Kyushu region, they saw the scene in the camera. One after another, fully armed soldiers stood behind Lin An. They lined up neatly. At a glance, there were actually thousands of them. The people in many important cities were shocked to find that among the neat ranks, they could find familiar faces from their respective important cities. That is the highest combat power of their respective cities. That is the top combat power in the entire Kyushu region. And now, they are all wearing the military uniforms of the Kyushu region, and they are all gathered together, standing behind their supreme commander. General. Dharma God. God of War. The shock of this moment is unimaginable. Because they represent the Kyushu region and all their important cities. The flag of the 9 provinces territory was flying above their heads. At this moment, the blood flowing in everyone's body seemed to boil. Almost at the same time, all the senior officials in the major cities stood up seriously. For a moment, the entire Kyushu territory seemed to fall into silence. The next moment, Lin An said deeply. Then, we will go to war with them. Almost at the same time he said these words, all the senior officials of Chongcheng turned around and raised their heads towards Lin An on the big screen. Their eyes were serious. Under everyone's gaze, they knelt down on one knee and looked towards Lin An. Lin An showed the highest courtesy in the Kyushu domain. The gods accept orders. Jiangdu accepts the order. Piaomiao City accepts the order. Jianghai City accepts the order. In an instant, the entire Kyushu territory erupted. The crowd in the square roared, waving their arms and shouting passionately. This is the first time that Kyushu territory, as a country, has launched a war since the spiritual energy was revived. Declare war on the other 3 powerful countries in the world and those who dare to interfere and provoke the Kyushu territory. We have given you an ultimatum. It's you who don't know how to cherish it. Then you just wait for our fangs to tear off your flesh and blood. Do you think the lion in the east can only sleep? But when the lion awakens, you will all tremble at his roar. Almost at the same time, the armies that had been prepared in major cities began to gather towards the east. In fact, they had made preparations 3 days ago. They have been waiting for this moment. At the same time, Jianghai City. Lin An raised his head and stared at the countless soldiers who had already assembled in the audience. Looking at the top combat forces in the Kyushu region behind them, they are all at their lowest level, the general. Such power can almost tear the entire world into pieces. Chen Daoming, who had already arrived in Jianghai City, looked at Lin An seriously and said, "Is there really going to be a war?" Lin An said expressionlessly, "The arrow is on the string and must be fired. We must let the Zhou domain determine the dominant position of mankind in this world as soon as possible." Chen Daoming said complicatedly, "Do you have deeper considerations? You shouldn't start a war just for conquest." Lin An looked deeply at his hand and said, "Because you said before that the second world change is coming, and you asked me to prepare for it, and now, I have already felt what has happened in this world. Faintly changing, I think that day is not far away." He never told anyone. Ever since he absorbed the souls of the 3 world-class experts, cured the Honkai, and returned to Kyushu after 3,000 years of training, his strength has grown to world-class levels. After reaching this state, he could clearly feel some subtle and imperceptible changes taking place in the world. Spiritual energy is turbulent. Space is turbulent. Chen Daoming frowned and said, "What did you notice?" Lin said expressionlessly, "Have you noticed that as time goes by, the space in our world has become more and more fragile, and now, even a low-level town general can easily tear apart the space?" Chen Daoming said seriously, "Yes, my life will is space. This feeling is particularly clear to me." Lin An narrowed his eyes and said, "This is just a relatively obvious change. In any case, in the near future, the world will obviously undergo some drastic changes. There may be many things that did not appear in the first spiritual energy recovery. The ancient existence will also revive." He thought about the message he had received from the Tree of Life. If the Tree of Life is just an insignificant part of a grand completion plan, so obviously, there are existences older than the fairy era hidden in this world. No one knows what their attitude is towards the humans of this era. But Lin An had a vague premonition that they would most likely appear along with this second world change. If before they appeared, humanity was still divided as it is now, without a leader, the consequences would be unpredictable. Lin An suddenly turned around and walked towards the distance, expressionlessly saying, "So, I will use this opportunity to let the Zhou territory occupy absolute dominance in this world. After I overturn the 8-tribe alliance, I will lead my army to those 3 countries. If they are willing to surrender, I will still give them a chance, and if they don't want to, let them be a stepping stone on our way forward. The king's rise to power must always step on the bones of the old king. From ancient times to the present, this has never changed." The next moment, Lin suddenly opened his eyes of law, and purple light burst out from his eyes instantly. Set off. In the east, the alliance of 8 ethnic groups. Bilisan and others stood tremblingly on the high platform. They looked at their remaining army of less than 30,000 people on the square, and the despair in their hearts almost burst out. Bilisan suddenly clenched the railing and said with blood-red eyes, "With just these troops, how can we be their opponent? We are seeking death. And these armies are not of the same mind. Everyone is afraid, and so are they." In Lin's inspiring pre-war mobilization, they felt only fear and trembling. They are also from the Kyushu region, but they are on the wrong team. If you stand in the wrong team, you will get beaten. And at this moment, on the high platform, a black-robed Hegel slowly walked up, his eyes flashed, and he said, "I knew that his goal was not your alliance of 8 tribes at all. I still underestimated him. In the eyes of that Lin En, you are just a dispensable existence. He didn't take you seriously at all. Here, his eyes are always on us. Byelicen felt chills in his heart. He knew his fate as a pawn and a puppet, but he didn't care about that now. What he cares about is how to survive and win this war. He turned to look at Hijal, gritted his teeth and said, "Lord Hijal, they have already set off." Hejal smiled lightly and said, "Similarly, we are also setting off. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 244. Almost at the same time. In the waters outside the Kyushu territory, one warship after another slowly appeared on the sea level. Although most countries had already evacuated when Lin issued the statement 3 days ago, most of the evacuations were small and medium-sized countries. As for the British Empire, the allies of the Guards, and the country of the rising sun, they have deeper interests and plans. Over the past 100 years, with the growing development of the Kyushu territory, they have become more and more powerful. And the stronger they are, the greater the threat to them. They have long been unable to allow the emergence of a superpower that would upset the balance. A few months ago, the Kyushu territory underwent great changes, and Lin An killed 3 world-class experts. For them, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. If they miss this opportunity, they will have to wait for the Kyushu territory to recover. Lin An's return has given Jiuzhu territory some breathing space. But they still don't want to believe that Lin An alone can restore the vitality of Jiuzhu territory. We have reached an agreement with the Guards' allies, the country of the rising sun. On the high platform, Hejal said slowly, with a mocking arc at the corner of his mouth. In this war, they will stand with us, Britain. Fight with us against the Kyushu region and jointly curb the rise of the Kyushu region. As long as Lin An and Chandaeming can be killed, the entire Kyushu region will collapse. The surrounding temperature obviously did not drop, but Byelicen still felt chills in his body. He knew that he was now a sinner in the 9 provinces territory. But at the same time, there is still a trace of greed in his heart. If the British coalition forces can really defeat Lin An and Chandaeming, then he may become the supreme ruler of the Kyushu territory. Even as a puppet, he is still the supreme ruler. Hijal raised his head and laughed suddenly. It's really ironic. Sure enough, the combative nature of us humans has never changed. No matter how earth-shaking changes occur in this world, we humans will still not change. We will still kill, fight, and war as before. Never stop. This is our nature. He suddenly turned his head to look to the west, and the strong wind blew his robes. Lin, do you like this never-ending killing as much as I do? Then, I'll wait for you here. I'm waiting for you to challenge me, the Emperor of the 9 provinces. Time passed by minute. Just less than half an hour later, they were in the sky above the territory of the 8 tribes alliance. Suddenly, there was lightning and thunder in the sky, the wind was surging, and the rain was heavy. Standing on the square, all the soldiers of the 8 clans alliance raised their heads subconsciously, with fear in their eyes. On the high platform, Hijal raised the corner of his mouth and said, "Coming." In the next moment, a dazzling bolt of lightning suddenly flashed across the sky. And in the midst of that dazzling lightning, the space above the sky suddenly became distorted. The next moment, everyone was watching in horror. Thousands of figures appeared in the sky. Under the reflection of lightning, they were like divine soldiers descending from the sky. It's the top combat force in the Kyushu region. They're coming. They're coming to kill us. On the square, the soldiers of the alliance of 8 races, whose spirits had long been on the verge of collapse, could be said to have completely broken through their inner defenses this time. They looked at the thousands of figures standing in the sky, and the fear in their eyes became more and more intense. Finally, in great fear, the soldiers ran in terror. Even if the officer yelled to stop him, it had no effect. Because their inner defenses have been breached, under the shadow of death, they have long lost the slightest desire to fight. A crack of lightning flashed across. The dazzling light reflected Lin's emotionless face in the sky. Haijal walked slowly in the heavy rain, among the people fleeing in all directions, and walked step by step in the direction of Lin and the others. He, they are all a bunch of trash as expected. In the end, they don't have to rely on us. Lin crossed her shoulders and looked down at him expressionlessly, saying, Great Britain's world-class magic god, Haijal, is indeed you. Haijal slowly raised his head, the dark hood shrouding his face in darkness, only revealing his sharp chin. It seems that you know me. Lin said indifferently, one of the 4 founding Dharma gods of Britain, and also the first person who clearly stated that he would support the alliance of 8 races to rebel against our Kyushu region. If it weren't for your support, they would also want to rebel against our Kyushu region, making trouble in the domain. Hijal let out a dry laugh and said, Yes, it's me. A large part of the reason why I appear in the Kyushu territory is also because of you. Lin said calmly, Oh. Hejel smiled and said, Because I am very interested in you, Lin, especially a few months ago, you single-handedly killed 3 world-class experts. You really perfectly interpreted the killing nature of human beings. He walked forward slowly and said, And on this point, I agree with you very much, because human beings are really no different from bugs. They devour, evolve, go back and forth, never ending, all our battles it's all about becoming stronger, just like you, just like me. Lin looked down at him, the heavy rain falling heavily. Lin said calmly, Maybe, Mr. Hejel, but the philosophical discussion ends here. Lin slowly pulled out the white sword in his hand, and drops of rain fell on the blade. Lin said expressionlessly, Because I don't have any patience for you. At that moment, Lin's figure instantly disappeared in the sky. The people around him didn't even see Lin's movements clearly, and Lin disappeared from their sight. And in the next moment, Hejel suddenly pulled out 2 blood-red blades from his waist. There was a loud clang. Lin's white sword collided heavily with his blood sword. Hegel's face showed a cruel smile. I admit that your sword is very strong, but my sword is no worse than yours, because these 2 swords were made by me using a corner of the world. Do you really think? Crack. A crisp sound like glass breaking came. His expression was slightly startled. At that moment, his pupils suddenly dilated. At the point where Lin's white sword collided with his blade slowly cracked into thin cracks, and those cracks were like the roots of a big tree, and they were spreading rapidly at a speed visible to the naked eye. His face changed drastically, and he said, How could it be? I can see the laws of things. Author, Yi Tiao Xianyue. Chapter 245. The next moment, Lin suddenly held the sword with both hands and drew an arc in the air. Under the extreme force, Hegel's body instantly flew directly to the east. In his astonished eyes, his body hit the ground and bounced again. Under the huge impact force, his body directly plowed a gully of more than 10 kilometers on the ground, and finally hit a building heavily. The whole audience was shocked. Lin slowly put away the sword, raised his head, and a purple light flashed in his eyes. It's really vulnerable. Above the sky, thousands of top fighters in Jiuzhu domain roared loudly, looking excited. Although they all came from Jiuzhu domain, few people actually witnessed Lin's battle on the spot. And now, they witnessed it with their own eyes, and this impact was unimaginable to them. Who is Hejel? They have all heard of that person's name. He is a madman. He is a world-class magic god in the British Empire. At the same time, he is also a terrifying powerhouse who practices both magic and martial arts. His reputation in the world even surpasses Chen Daoming. He is also one of the most powerful world-class masters in the world. But now, such a master was suppressed by Lin in one move. They roared, their hearts surging. Lin. 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 Lin An slowly raised his head and walked towards the city in front step by step, saying expressionlessly, "Attack, wipe out all the forces of the 8 clans alliance that dare to resist." Yes, thousands of people roared behind him. The next moment, they rushed to the east like a swarm of insects. The soldiers who still stayed in the central square were finally completely shrouded in fear. Bai Lisan's eyes trembled and he kept retreating. At this time, in the east, Haijal suddenly broke through the ruins and flew into the sky. He looked at Lin An and the thousands of top fighters who rushed over fiercely, and the 2 battle blades made of world fragments in his hands were already in pieces. The black robe on his body had also turned into pieces in the impact, revealing his true body. He was wearing a silver chain mail, and each of the buckles in it emitted a cold light. This armor was obviously made of the top-grade materials. He looked at Lin An fiercely and said, "Very good, Lin An, I underestimated you. In this case, let's go to war. I want to see whether your Zhu domain is strong or our British Empire's army is more fierce." Just as he finished speaking, a long whistle suddenly came from the distant sky behind him. That is, in the next moment, black spots appeared one after another above the sea in the far east. Those black spots were so dense that they almost covered the entire sky, and they were coming towards them at a very fast speed. That was the army. It was an army composed of the top combat forces of Britain and 2 other countries. The army of Zhu domain saw the scene that covered the sky and the sun, and their faces changed slightly. They can all fly. That is to say, their minimum strength is at least above the Grand Master level. The appearance of such a large army means something that is self-evident. "It seems that you really want to go to war with us," a magic god roared. Hegel laughed up to the sky, his black hair dancing wildly, and said, "Yes, in fact, this war should have broken out decades ago before Chen Daoming came to power, but it is not too late now. The world is only so big. If you want to rise, it will inevitably compress our living area. The only way is to contain you here." A fierce red light suddenly burst out from his eyes. "So, you all have to die." But just as he finished speaking, a sword sound suddenly came from the sky. Tianzhao Lin An's voice came, and at that moment, he drew out the white sword. Hegel's eyes widened and his face changed drastically. The whole sky was covered by a dazzling white light at that moment, and a sword energy spread directly towards him. It was not a sword energy in the ordinary sense, because it was really too wide, and the diameter alone reached more than 10 kilometers. After a 10,000th of a second, the sword energy that tore the sky fell on him. Boom! A huge roar accompanied by a shrill scream came. It directly caused a magnitude 10 earthquake on the earth, and even the Zhu domain strongmen standing in the sky could feel the shock brought by the huge impact of the power. Thousands of top combat forces in Zhu domain all stopped at this moment, and they looked in front of them in astonishment. The sword intent spread directly from their feet to the eastern sea area dozens of kilometers away, and directly rushed into the ocean, causing huge waves of hundreds of meters. One sword, the earth cracked and the sky was shocked. In the distance, helicopters came to the 8 clans alliance one after another. And on the ground, there were dense Zhu domain troops. There were at least hundreds of thousands of people. They are the second team of Zhu domain. Their mission is to enter the city and take over the overall situation after the top combat forces led by Lin An have wiped out all the opposing combat forces that dared to resist. When the cold power of the sword spread, the whole army could feel the terrible power. It appeared. It appeared. The war correspondents who came with the army looked excitedly at the dazzling strong light bursting from the east. He held the microphone, pointed to the east, and shouted to the camera. It was the sword energy of Lord Lin An that tore the sky. I was fortunate to witness the scene on the northern battlefield a few days ago. This time Lord Lin An used this devastating move again. It seems that the battle in front has just begun and it has reached a fever pitch. Through the full-scale live broadcast of the battlefield front by the war correspondents, all the people in the entire Jiuzhou region saw the dazzling white light spreading from the east. They were shocked in their hearts, and the expressions on their faces were even more astonished. They had never seen such a terrible power. And when the white light dissipated, they saw a scene that they would never forget through the live broadcast camera. A crack. A crack that spread for hundreds of kilometers. It directly split a city in half, spread directly to the sea, and even split hundreds of kilometers of sea in half. Instantly, the whole country was in an uproar. Too terrifying. Lord Lin's strength is indeed well deserved. Lord Lin is invincible. The whole country was excited and their blood was boiling. And the next moment, they captured a scene in the camera. Directly above the distant sky of the city, they saw a figure slowly floating up. That person was wearing the battle robe of the supreme ruler. In the whistling wind, his voice was like thunder and could be clearly heard within a radius of 100 miles. It's Lord Lin. Lin stood in the sky, expressionless and said, "No matter how many people there are, as long as they set foot on our land, they will be killed without mercy." The first batch of thousands of top combat forces all roared and rushed to the east. Kill. For Lord Lin. For Jiuzhou. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xuanhuan. Chapter 246. And the next moment, on the eastern coast. After Lin An's sword was slashed out, the huge waves of thousands of meters directly submerged the ships of the British Empire docked on the shore. One warship after another fell and exploded. And the deep gully cut by Lin An caused a second round of disaster. Countless seawater poured back into the abyss in the center. This pulled the surrounding warships that were not affected to surge uncontrollably towards the trench. Warning! Warning! The warship is unbalanced. 80% of the area of the entire ship is damaged. Quick! Escape! Get away from the warship! All those who can fly, rescue other personnel immediately. Quick! Hurry up! The fleet on the entire coast was in chaos. The shrill screams accompanied by the explosions resounded throughout the entire eastern coast. And the next moment, Haijal, who was directly affected by Lin An's sword energy and almost shattered, struggled to climb out of the gully. He was covered in blood, and the mail on his chest had already been broken by Lin An's sword energy. He screamed to the sky. He was not killed by Lin An's sword energy, which was enough to show his strength. But just when he showed his head and had not said a word, a figure suddenly appeared in front of him, his pupils suddenly dilated, and his face finally showed an extremely terrified expression. What was reflected in his eyes was Lin An's expressionless face. "What do you want to do?" he said in horror. The next moment, he only felt his neck being strangled in an instant. Lin An grabbed his neck directly and moved towards the eastern sea at a terrifying speed that exceeded the speed of sound. Along the way, his body kept hitting high-rise buildings and hills, and his shrill screams resounded through the sky. The next moment, Lin An held his neck, suddenly flew up to a height of tens of thousands of meters, and then threw him to the ground expressionlessly. Boom! A loud noise. Under the horrified gaze of everyone on the east coast, his body hit the largest warship of the British Empire like a meteorite. The warship exploded instantly, and the entire warship broke in half. Lord Higar, the British Empire's army trembled. The next moment, they saw Lin standing 1,000 meters high, looking down at them like a god. The British soldiers who climbed up the coastline with difficulty felt a huge fear in an instant. That's Lin, the supreme ruler of Jiuzhou. He's coming. How could this happen? Lord Higar. He's coming. And the next moment, under the horrified gaze of all the British Empire soldiers, Lin raised his hand to the sky. A dazzling purple light suddenly flashed in his eyes. "Do you know whose territory this is?" Crack! In an instant, the whole sky was covered with dark clouds, thunder roared, and lightning flashed across the sky. It was a clear sky just now, and there was no change in the weather, but the moment Lin En raised his hand, the whole sky changed color. All the people raised their heads tremblingly. At this moment, under the threat of the power of heaven, their legs were shaking and uncontrollable. "Do you know who is standing in front of you?" The emotionless voice came from the sky. And at that moment, in their horrified eyes, the thunder in the sky suddenly turned blood red. Blood-colored lightning. The power of this level of lightning is thousands of times that of ordinary thunder and lightning. Even Jianghai City, thousands of miles away, can easily see the thunder clouds surging over the eastern sea. In the rolling fire of the battleship sunk by Haijal, the wounded Haijal struggled to climb out of the rolling waves and burning flames. The anger and humiliation in his heart almost burned his whole body. "Lin En," he roared angrily at Lin En in the sky. And at that moment, Lin En led the thunder in the sky to pour down to the ground. "Since you know, how dare you invade my territory? You are seeking your own death." At that moment, in the horrified eyes of everyone, it seemed as if the whole sky collapsed. The dense red lightning formed a lightning net, covering the entire eastern coastline. Boom! Boom! The shrill screams were instantly covered by the rolling thunder. The top combat power of Jiuzhou domain, dozens of kilometers away, was almost affected by this terrifying thunder burial. "Gods," they said in horror, "Lord Lin En is going to wipe them out alone." And through the live broadcast channel of the war correspondent, people in the entire Jiuzhou domain saw this extremely shocking scene. Although the camera was at least dozens of kilometers away from Lin En, the overwhelming air waves from the thunder burial were so strong that even countless people in the Jiuzhou area who were separated by the screen felt trembling. The war correspondent held the microphone and screamed, "It appeared! It appeared! As we all know, Lord Lin En is the controller of the law. All elements in this world must obey Lord Lin En's orders, and thunder is Lord Lin En's favorite element. Compared with the thunder waterfall Lord Lin En showed a few months ago, the current thunder waterfall is simply too powerful to imagine." In the capital of the gods, Chen Daoming looked at the scene on the screen that looked like a punishment from heaven and sighed. "Lin En, you are too hard, keep a low profile, keep a low profile." This bloody thunder waterfall lasted for more than 10 minutes. When the dark clouds dispersed, the top combat forces of Jiuzhou domain who came were all shocked. The entire eastern coastline has completely changed under the baptism of Lin En's thunder waterfall. It was as if the whole earth was turned upside down, all the buildings had turned into fine powder, and even the sea water had boiled. Above the sea level, there were fragments of broken ships everywhere. The blazing fire and the boiling steam of the sea water intertwined, turning this place into a hell on earth. Destroyed. The entire British Empire's expeditionary force was wiped out by Lin En alone before it landed. This is too terrifying. Is this the true strength of Lord Lin En? Everyone was stunned. They found that they had not experienced a few decent battles since they came here. Lin En did everything alone. According to this situation, Lord Lin En can destroy their country alone. Then what is the meaning of our coming here? Are we just here to cheer? The people around were all stunned. They found that the meaning of their existence seemed to be very thin. "Where is Lord Lin En?" one person asked suddenly. The next moment, everyone looked at the eastern sea in shock. At the end of the sea level, the British warships that were not affected in the distance were madly driving away from their Kyushu region. Behind them, a figure was chasing them like a wolf chasing sheep. "It's Lord Lin," the people around were shocked. "Lord Lin is chasing the entire fleet. I can see the laws of things." Author, Yi Tiao Xianyue. Chapter 247. Above the Eastern Sea. The remaining British ships are madly heading for the open sea. Quick! Quick! Speed up! Speed up! Evacuate at full speed! Evacuate at full speed! He's about to catch up! Run! The remaining dozen ships of the British Empire were all panicked. The people on the ships were running around in panic. They sent nearly 200 warships of various types this time, but now only a dozen of them have been killed. Especially after they witnessed the thunder waterfall that just happened on the east coast, their fighting spirit had long been crushed. A devil. A godlike existence. Even Lord Hyjal is not his opponent, so what are they? Don't panic. Don't panic. The captain of the flagship rushed out of the cabin and screamed at the terrified crowd on the deck. We still have Lord Hyjal. He is not dead yet. We are not defeated yet. As soon as he finished speaking, his adjutant tremblingly handed him the telescope and said, "Captain, our Lord Hyjal may be in trouble." The captain immediately picked up the telescope and looked in the direction he pointed. This look almost made him have a myocardial infarction. On the sea surface in the distance, Lin An grabbed Hyjal's ankle with one hand and was flying towards them at a very fast speed close to the sea surface. And Hyjal's head was drooping directly above the sea surface, communicating and rubbing with the sea at zero distance. The captain took off the telescope, rolled his eyes, and fell backwards directly. "Captain! Captain! Quick! Hurry up and bring the captain's quick-acting heart pills. Quick! Evacuate at full speed. Evacuate at full speed. Throw away everything that can be thrown. Reduce the weight and evacuate at full speed." The dozen warships went crazy and almost overloaded their engines. But this was far from enough. Just a few minutes later, Lin An had already caught up with their last ship. "He's coming! He's coming!" Everyone on the warship was in a panic. "Attack!" the captain of the warship screamed. He knew that if they didn't resist with all their strength, they would have absolutely no hope. Resistance might still have a glimmer of hope. But obviously, he still overestimated the combat effectiveness of their warships. Their warships didn't even make any reaction. Lin An fell from the sky with a bang and landed heavily on their deck. The warship, with a displacement of more than 40,000 m, tilted 45 degrees to the left at the moment Lin An fell. The people on the ship were dumped on the sea like dumplings. "What kind of monster is this?" the captain was almost desperate. Lin An looked around indifferently and said, looking at your direction, "You want to go to the kingdom of the rising sun, but there is no chance." In an instant, a dazzling purple light burst out from Lin An's eyes. As everyone watched in horror, Lin An suddenly bent down and inserted his hand into the ship. What is he going to do? What is he going to do to our ship? Everyone around was terrified. And the next moment, there was a huge sound of metal tearing, and under the horror of the people around, their entire ship instantly cracked into huge cracks one after another. Lin An tore it violently to both sides like tearing a piece of bread. In an instant, under the horror of the crew of other ships, they saw that the battleship had a huge crack in the middle. The next moment, the battleship with a displacement of 40,000 meters was directly torn in half from the middle. Torn apart. The shrill screams and explosions echoed throughout the sea. The crew members on other ships were completely terrified. What kind of power is this? Even the ship was torn apart. What can we use to fight it? Help! Someone come to save me! All the crew members were desperate. And the next moment, they saw that in the wreckage of the warship that was torn in half, a figure suddenly soared into the sky and flew hundreds of meters high. Everyone raised their heads and looked at the figure in the sky with trembling. Lin An, the current ruler of the Jiuzhu domain, the terrifying existence that crushed the three world-class strongmen. And the next moment, they suddenly saw that Lin An threw something in their direction. The people around them fell into fear instantly. What did he throw over here? Quick! Quick! Shoot it down. Absolutely can't let that thing get close to our ship. But the next moment, when everyone saw clearly what Lin An threw over, everyone was stunned. The one he threw over was none other than the world-class powerhouse of their British Empire, Lord Hijal. They could even clearly see the blood on their Lord Hijal's face, their entire body was covered with scars, and they could clearly sense that their bodies had long been twisted. But obviously, Hijal was still alive. Because they could still hear the long, shrill scream coming from Hijal's mouth. Lin An, you will die well dash. Everyone went crazy. Their Lord Hijal, a world-class strongman who could rank among the best in the world, was thrown here like a ball. This was simply an insult to their entire British Empire. And in the next moment, Hijal hit their largest flagship like a missile. The entire ship instantly exploded under the impact of Hijal, and was sunk directly in the end. This scene completely destroyed the last bit of luck in their hearts. They knew that they were dead. Standing in the sky, Lin An said slowly. 3 days ago, it was my ultimatum to you. Since you don't know how to cherish it, you must be prepared to accept the consequences. The next moment, Lin An slowly drew out the white sword. The sharp sound of the sword instantly caused huge waves to roll on the sea. The next moment, Lin An's eyes narrowed suddenly, and a residual image suddenly left on the spot. As people watched in horror, he shuttled through their dozen warships at an unimaginable speed. No one knew what happened. A few seconds later, Lin An's body appeared on the sea hundreds of meters away. The sea breeze blew his hair, and Lin An slowly sheathed his sword and said, "Are you also going to my Kyushu region?" His words were not directed at the dozen British warships behind him. But at this moment, he was speaking to the hundreds of warships anchored hundreds of miles away. The flags of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun were hung on those warships. They witnessed Lin An's hunting of the British warships throughout the whole process, and everyone on the warships was terrified. The next moment, Lin An raised his head, and the breeze blew through his hair. And at the same moment when he raised his head, the dozen warships behind him exploded one after another. Because Lin An's sword was too fast. It was so fast that even after cutting off their warships, the structures of those warships remained intact. Boom! Boom! Huge explosions, accompanied by shrill screams, resounded through the sky. Huge mushroom clouds rose behind Lin An. Retreat! Retreat! Turn the ship around immediately! Return immediately! Hurry up! Don't waste time! The fleet of the Sunrise Country was so shocked that its mentality collapsed. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 248. They turned the bows quickly at an unimaginable speed under Lin An's gaze, and quickly returned along the original route. The fleet of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun was already trembling. After they received the distress signal and the signal for support from the British Empire, they immediately marched the army that had already assembled to the Kyushu region. But who knew that they would encounter such a terrible scene on the high seas? How can they fight this? They can even tear apart warships with their hands. What can they use to fight? Use teeth. Why are you running? Lin An raised his head, and a trace of impatience appeared in his eyes. You should have had this result a long time ago. Why don't you accept the arrangement of fate for you calmly? Hearing this, the captains of the fleet of the Kingdom of the Rising Sun were all upset. Accept the arrangement of fate for us? You want us to die? Besides, it's not the arrangement of fate. It's your arrangement. Run, the captains roared and issued the highest level of orders. More than 10 minutes later. On the sea, after dealing with the Eastern Eight Clans Alliance and the remaining British soldiers, the thousands of unharmed top fighters in the Kyushu region followed Lin An's footsteps and finally arrived here. The moment they arrived here, everyone was shocked. All destroyed. Really all destroyed. Lord Lin En really didn't leave a single hair for the other side. They looked at the neatly cut wreckage of the warship on the sea, and looked at some British crew members struggling desperately on the sea. The astonishment on their faces was hard to conceal. They looked at the expressions on each other's faces, and their eyes were a little dull. So what is the meaning of our existence? Are we really here just to shout 666? Not good. This is really not good. At least leave a few for us. Lord Lin En. Above the sky, the top fighters in the Kyushu region were about to cry. When Lord Lin En led them to the battle, the scene was so passionate. They felt that their bones were about to burn, and they had even imagined themselves on the battlefield, fighting bravely under the leadership of Lord Lin En. However, this development seemed a little wrong. At this moment, a martial god suddenly found a figure in the wreckage. Look. That person seems to be Hegel, who had said before that he wanted to kill Lord Lin En. Everyone looked over. On the wreckage, there lay a man covered in wounds. The man's whole body was twitching, his mouth was wide open, his eyes were dull, and he kept spitting out sea water and blood from his mouth, and he was still mumbling. Lin En, you. It's Hegel, the highest combat power in Jiuzhu domain, all exclaimed. This is one of the most powerful combat powers in Britain, a world-class god of law and martial god, a madman known as a war maniac. At this moment, this man was lying there like a dead dog. Hijal was very miserable. Because Lin En never took him seriously. Along the way, he experienced Lin En's sky-tearing sword energy, was dropped from tens of thousands of meters high, was hit by lightning, and was destroyed by Lin En as a missile. Hijal was able to survive, which was already a blessing from fate. And the next moment, Hijal's eyes widened. He instantly saw the malicious smiles of the people in Jiuzhu in the sky. What are you going to do? Hijal was terrified. Being tortured by Lin En like this, his whole mental state was a little trance. Above the sky, the top fighters in Jiuzhu showed chilling smiles on their faces. Many of them are already old men who can grow to the stage of town generals or martial arts gods. According to normal reason, they would definitely not show such expressions. But obviously, Hijal activated the fighting spirit in their hearts. Under Hijal's horrified gaze, the thousands of top fighters slowly approached him. Don't come over here. Don't come over here. Hijal screamed in great fear. The next moment, huge explosions were heard above the sea, accompanied by various sword energy fluctuations, lightning, fire, frost, so lively. 10 minutes later, everyone looked at Hijal, who was already bleeding and dying, and stopped torturing him. We can't waste time here anymore, we must support Lord Lin immediately. The thousands of top fighters raised their heads. But the next moment, they were shocked. Before leaving, Lin gave each of them a positioning device. These positioning devices allow them to find Lin's location at the first time. The original intention of these devices was to prevent them from leaving the main battlefield due to chaos, but now, they have become displays for them to track Lin. They looked at Lin's location at this moment in the locator. Everyone was stunned. Lord Lin. They trembled. Slow down. Please restrain yourself. How come you have reached the territory of the land of the rising sun? It is thousands of kilometers away from us, sir. If you continue like this, you will kill all over the world. Panasonic Port is the largest port in the land of the rising sun. Almost all the warships in the land of the rising sun have been underground since then. This is also the most prosperous military city in the land of the rising sun. But at this moment, the most prosperous port in the land of the rising sun has completely changed into something else. The densely packed wreckage of warships covered the entire sea surface, and billowing flames and thick smoke obscured the sky. Standing on the port and looking towards the sea, you can see that the wreckage of the battleship spread from the sea level to the land. They were killed directly. And above the sky, a figure was standing at this moment. He had black hair shawl and was wearing a robe that symbolized the supreme ruler of the Kyushu territory. The expression on his face was calm. And in the sky opposite him, there were at least 1,000 ability users densely packed. The power fluctuations they spread out were very terrifying. Among them, the ones with the lowest strength are probably those at the Grand Master level. And on the land, there were even densely packed warriors. But at this moment, they all looked at the man in the sky with great fear. Lin En stepped on the void and slowly took a step forward. The thousands of strong men immediately and subconsciously stepped back hundreds of meters, the fear in their eyes almost bursting out. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. I can see the laws of things. Author, Yitiao Xianyue. Chapter 249. Lin En said slowly, I thought that the land of the rising sun was as strong as the clouds, so when I came here, I was still a little worried. In order to be fully prepared, I even used 60% of my strength. But I never expected. Lin En frowned and said, you are so vulnerable that you can't even resist my first wave of attacks. Then what else can you do to resist my subsequent attacks? Take the lead. You really let me down. This kind of scolding made everyone present feel like they were going to explode. They have never seen anyone like this. After killing them, you still blame them for being too weak and inexperienced. This is simply the biggest insult to them. That's right. In just a few minutes, their carefully prepared defense system was instantly shattered by Lin's attack. He easily crushed them all like chopping vegetables. This is simply a one-sided massacre. You are an out-and-out devil. Don't really think that you are invincible. The world-class experts from our land of the rising sun have not arrived yet. Otherwise, how could we tolerate you being so presumptuous? You've come so far. Opposite Lin En, the strong man from the land of the rising sun glared angrily, eyes wide open. But to Lin, it was all just their incompetent rage. Lin En hugged his shoulders and said calmly. You want me to stop here? Yes, as long as you are willing to sign a treaty with me and declare unconditional surrender to the Kyushu territory, I can consider being open to you, the country of the rising sun. As soon as these words came out, they completely angered the country of the rising sun. Lin En raised his head and said matter-of-factly, hundreds of years ago, haven't you always been vassals of our Central Plains land? Now I'm just asking you to pick up your glorious tradition again. Isn't this being forced upon others? If the words just made the powerful men of the land of the rising sun angry, then this sentence almost completely detonated their shame. This naked mockery is an insult to all of them. But they knew that what he said was indeed true. Hundreds of years ago, they were indeed vassals of the Central Plains. But just because it was true, that made them surprisingly angry. Lin, how dare you insult us? Even if all of us are killed today, we will still fight to the death with you. Kill. The enraged people in the country of the rising sun immediately went to kill Lin En. Standing on the ground and looking towards the sky, you can clearly see that they are like locusts, overwhelmingly surrounding Lin En. Almost in an instant, Lin's figure was no longer visible in the sky. The people who could confront Lin En head-on were at least in the realm of Grand Masters, and there were countless generals and martial gods. They almost mobilized the whole country to build this line of defense on this coastal border. Because they knew that against a supreme powerhouse like Lin En, conventional combat power would be completely useless. The only way to defeat a world-class strongman in a conventional battle is to wait until the opponent is tired of killing, and then exhaust the opponent to death. As long as you give them time, they can completely destroy a country on their own. Kill. Even if he is a world-class strongman, so what? There are so many of us, how can we still be afraid of him? In an instant, the sky was filled with all kinds of terrifying fluctuations. frost, fire, thunderstorm, blood, and so on. Even the sea set off huge waves hundreds of meters high amid violent energy fluctuations. Lin An's body has also been completely submerged in the violent energy impact, and disappeared from people's sight. Did it succeed? Thousands of top powerhouses in the entire kingdom of the rising sun excitedly raised their heads and looked up at the sky after completing the first round of attacks. But at the next moment, a voice came from the rolling collision of energy. Is this all you have, strength? I thought you might be able to bring me a little surprise, but now it seems that I was wrong. In an instant, the expressions of the thousands of top fighters from the country of the rising sun changed drastically. The next moment, in the midst of the rolling energy fluctuations, a hand slowly stretched out. Under everyone's horrified gaze, that hand seemed to have waved away a wisp of smoke, and all traces of their attacks remained. It was destroyed in that moment. For a moment, the whole place was silent. Above the sky, Lin An stood there. There was no damage on his body, and even the corners of his clothes showed no trace of damage from the energy impact. The expression of the whole crowd changed, and their eyes once again showed a look of extreme fear. Lin An said coldly, but at the same time, you have also worn away the last bit of patience I had for you. Lin An raised his head and said word by word. Perhaps, only death can make you truly understand your own weakness. In an instant, Lin An's eyes burst out with dazzling purple light. The moment they saw those purple eyes, everyone present fell into despair. It's not that Lin An was too powerful. If thousands of top-level combatants were attacked at the same time, even a demigod would be seriously injured. But they ignored it. Lin An is not an ordinary world-class strong man at all. Most of his strength comes from his absolute control over the law. And the law encompasses all forms of power in this world, whether it is blood, the manipulation of elements, or some strange supernatural powers, they cannot escape the control of the law. Under the suppression of absolute power, Lin An can now use his control over the law to forcibly deprive them of their control over elements and blood. In front of the real emperor, those energy means affected by the law will only feel trembling. In other words, in that moment just now, Lin An deprived thousands of top combat forces of their control over elements, blood, etc. Let their attacks be completely invalidated before they touch him. In an instant, Lin An suddenly stretched out his hand to them. The purple light in his eyes almost gushed out. This is the first time that Lin An decided to use the Eye of Law completely after leaving that small world. The previous small-scale battles could not let them really know how terrifying his control over the Eye of Law has reached. Then this time, he will show it in full. And in an instant, on the ground, all the strong men who had risen from the sun felt waves of vibrations coming from their feet. They were unsteady and had fear in their eyes. What is he going to do? What on earth does he want to do? And in the next moment, their faces changed drastically. Gods above! I can see the laws of things. Author, Yi Tiao Xianyue. Chapter 250. In their vision, they saw that the water of the entire ocean was boiling at that moment. At first, it was just a tiny splash of water, but just a few seconds later, under the horrified gaze of all of them, the entire ocean water was under Lin An's control and slowly floated to the sky. No, it was not the entire ocean. But from the coastline to the end of the sea level that they could see. All the sea water slowly floated to the sky. This horrible scene could even be clearly seen by people in the extreme north of the kingdom of the rising sun. What on earth is that? All those who confronted Lin An retreated in horror. He lifted all the water of the entire ocean into space. The direction in front of them was originally the sea, but now it has become a huge dry abyss. This sense of oppression and fear brought them endless despair. In the city, the civilians who witnessed all this screamed and fled to the north in panic. If the water in this entire sea really vented down, even if it did not attack them head-on, even if it fell back into the ocean, the huge waves it aroused would be enough to engulf the entire rising sun country. Quick! Quick! Build a defense line immediately. Just when everyone was in a state of panic, there were bursts of air-breaking sounds coming from the distant sky. A man and a woman broke through the void and appeared in front of everyone in the rising sun country in an instant. It's Amaterasu and Xuanhuan. The powerful men in the rising sun country who had already fallen into despair immediately became excited as if they saw hope. Amaterasu and Xuanhuan, the two world-class gods of the rising sun country. They represent the absolute prestige and strength of the rising sun country, and are also the foundation for their rising sun country to become a world-class power. It is rumored that they have been in seclusion in the underground of the east capital of the rising sun country, impacting the demigods. If the rising sun country had not encountered an unsolvable national disaster, they would generally not come forward. And at this moment, they came so eagerly. Obviously, they had already sensed that the kingdom of the rising sun would face an unimaginable catastrophe this time. They roared, and almost at that moment, they mobilized all their strength. In an instant, under the gaze of everyone, a huge energy barrier stretching for hundreds of kilometers spread out from their bodies. They converted all their magic power into the energy barrier. The thousands of top fighters of the kingdom of the rising sun also woke up at this moment, and they immediately transferred all their power to the energy barrier at that moment. In an instant, the protection range of the energy barrier expanded again. Lin En, who stood high in the sky, witnessed all this. He didn't really want to submerge the entire kingdom of the rising sun. If he wanted to, he would have done it before the two world-class strongmen arrived. What Lin En had to do was to defeat the defense of the entire nation of this island country. Let them surrender willingly. Because he knew very well that any conditions offered to a country like the rising sun country would be regarded as a sign of weakness and incompetence by them, and the best way to conquer them was to absolutely crush their military force. The next moment, Lin En looked down at the defense line they had built, then slowly moved his fingers and said, "Go." In an instant, under the horrified gaze of all the rising sun country's strong men, the sea suspended in the sky rushed towards them. Boom! A loud sound that was so intense that it could even be heard in the Kyushu region. The energy barrier they had built, almost at the moment of contact, instantly cracked into countless cracks. All the top combat forces of the rising sun country all vomited blood at that moment. Accepting the impact of the entire ocean, this impact force, even if evenly distributed among thousands of people, is unbearable. There are even people with slightly lower strength who have been directly shocked and died by the impact of the ocean, with their internal organs shattered. How can he be so strong? Where on earth did you provoke such a monster? You better give me an explanation. The world-class strongmen Amaterasu and Xuanhuan were so angry that their eyes were almost instantly swollen with bloodshot. Amaterasu gritted her teeth and roared at the top town generals around her. The surrounding town generals all looked at each other in dismay, not daring to speak. Although Amaterasu and Xuanhuan were the strongest fighters in their rising sun country, they were both obsessed with cultivation. In the past 10 years, they have been in seclusion in order to impact the semi-god realm. The real control of the rising sun country is the Supreme Council of their rising sun country, which is composed of national-level strongmen. If it weren't for Amaterasu and Xuanhuan who felt the powerful energy fluctuations that appeared at the border of the rising sun country, which made them feel it, and awakened them, I'm afraid that even if the rising sun country was destroyed, they would still be kept in the dark. But they knew that now was definitely not the time to say these things. In the next moment, everyone's face changed drastically. Under the impact of the sea, the cracks on the energy barrier spread out across the entire barrier like vines. Not good. Our barrier will soon collapse, the top fighters of the rising sun country screamed in fear. And the next moment, the thing that worried them the most happened. There was a loud bang. The energy barrier was broken, and thousands of acres of sea water rushed towards them. When one place was broken, the entire energy barrier was completely shattered in a chain reaction. The next moment, countless sea water rushed in like a beast. Those top fighters were instantly submerged in the rolling waves, and the shrill screams resounded through the sky. Amaterasu and Zosu screamed. Because the rolling sea water, after breaking through their defense, instantly crushed towards the city behind them. The sea water of the entire sea. And after their defense line was broken, there were millions of unarmed civilians in the city behind them. No. Amaterasu and Zyuoxu immediately broke through the space and came to the sky above the city, facing the sea that was rushing down from the sky. Their eyes were about to burst. For the first time in decades, they clearly felt such a huge fear. And the next moment, when all of them thought that the whole city would be reduced to ruins in the vast sea water. Suddenly, at the moment when the vast sea water was about to pour into the city, they were shocked to see that the boundless sea water was stagnant there as if time had stopped. Under the gaze of everyone, the huge waves that rushed into the sky, crackling and condensing into a huge ice sculpture. All the sea water was frozen at that moment.